Make every night a wonderful journey, no matter where you are. Good night, sweet dreams. The first story. Gates. Around the world exist massive holes in the ground, the edges surrounded by a metal collar, and strange phenomena all about the areas they are located. These are the gates. The gates have been known throughout ancient civilizations and tribes. One man named Mel Waters has brought focus to them. The two he has found have been dubbed Mel's Holes. Mel asserts that, for years, locals had known about the bottomless nature of the hole, dumping garbage down the hole, including dead cattle, truckloads of old auto tires, and large appliances like refrigerators and TV tubes. When garbage was dumped in the hole, no sound of the object hitting the bottom was heard. Mel claims he began a series of experiments with the hole on his property, including one where he lowered a piece of food into the hole to detect if any water was at the bottom at the end of progressively longer lengths of fishing line. His last attempt lowered the piece down to 80,000 feet. At that point, in 1997, Mel sent a fax to the Coast AM show describing the hole, and shortly thereafter appeared on the show. Soon after the broadcasts, Mel claims that men he identified as government agents told him that there was a plane crash nearby and that he could not approach the hole. He says that the government then offered to pay him a large monthly stipend to lease the land in perpetuity. These alleged payments are said to have continued from March 1997 through the beginning of 2000. In December 1999, while on a bus to Olympia, Washington, Mel claims he witnessed an altercation between police officers and another passenger, after which he was taken off the bus to sign a police statement. According to Mel, the next thing he recalls is walking around San Francisco. 12 days later, he claims he had been physically beat. Hormones were extracted. An alleged IV scar on his arm convinced him that he had been drugged. Mel claims that he later returned to the hole, at which time he was served with papers indicating that his ownership was now in question due to modifications that had been made, presumably by the government tenants. Mel alleges that his assets were frozen for unstated reasons. When he appeared on Coast to Coast, Mel Waters described the hole as being roughly 9 feet across and at least 80,000 feet deep. He also claimed that it had had numerous supernatural powers. According to Mel, a dead hunting dog thrown into the hole by a local was seen much later running through the woods, as if hunting with somebody else. After his appearance on Coast to Coast in 2000, Mel claimed on a subsequent appearance that he had found a second hole. This second hole is alleged to be on public land in Nevada, under the management of the Federal Bureau of Land Management. According to Mel, the land nearby is used by Native Americans as well as members of the Basque community, who were using the land for grazing sheep. Mel described the second hole as being 9 feet in diameter, the same dimensions as the first hole. Mel claims that the Nevada hole has a solid metal liner or collar sticking out of the ground 2 feet high, 2 feet deep, with several notches in it. According to Mel, local Basques say the hole has been there, in its current state, for their community's entire existence, dating back to the 19th century. He claims one man had personal recollection of the hole since he was young, over 70 years ago at the time of the interview, since around the 1930s. In addition to his claims regarding the Basque community and the second hole, Mel has also speculated about her past connection to the second hole. He claims he found a whale bone near the first hole, which he asserts could have Basque origins to a history of whaling in Basque culture. Mel further claims that the hole occasionally emits a black beam. He acknowledged that this is a contradiction, but a black beam of light, okay, comes from the hole. It lasts a very short time, but it just goes directly up to the sky if you had a flashlight, and it was capable of throwing up a solid black. Mel claims that he and assorted Basque locals performed an experiment with the Nevada hole, in which they lowered in a bucket of ice they bought from the grocery store. Allegedly, one bucket of ice was lowered 1,500 feet into the hole, and the other bucket of ice was kept at the surface as a control. By the time half the ice on the surface bucket had melted, the bucket in the hole was to be retrieved according to Mel. The ice in the lowered bucket had not melted, and additionally, was no longer cold to the touch. He claims that the ice had been changed in an undefined way, and described it as having a texture like silik, the secant found in packaged food. As a further experiment, Mel claims they placed the alleged bucket of unmelted ice on a cooking fire, and instead of melting, the ice allegedly began to burn. Mel Waters described the fire as like the last flicker before you turn off a gas stove. Mel goes on to claim that this new substance could be used as a source of heat, saying that one guy took some stuff home, he put it in his wood stove, and the thing's been keeping his place warm for over 3 months, September to January. Mel claims this man also reported that steam from a nearby kettle was absorbed by the burning ice, and that the area surrounding the burning ice was always very dry. According to Mel, after a few months the stove with the burning ice crashed through the floor of the man's cabin for unknown reasons, and that the man returned weeks later to find the entire cabin collapsed into wood dust. Mel attributed this alleged phenomenon to all of the moisture being sucked out of the wood by the burning ice. Another experiment Mel claims to have performed on the hole involved lowering a living sheep to a depth of 1,500 feet, resulting in the death of the animal and the appearance of a mysterious seal-like entity. Mel claims that the sheep was led to the hole, but became agitated when it approached the hole and had to be stunned and placed in a crate. According to him, the sheep awakened as it was being placed over the hole and began thrashing around in its crate and making screaming noises. The crate was allegedly lowered to about 700 feet, at which point Mel claims that the vibrations caused by the sheep's agitation could no longer be felt. He claims that when the cable had been lowered to its full length of 1,500 feet, the metal collar around the hole began to vibrate. According to Mel, the sheep was left at this depth for 30 minutes before being wedged back up the surface, where it was found to be dead. Mel claims that from an external perspective the dead sheep appeared the same as when lowered, but that inside, the sheep looked like it had been cooked. In addition, Mel claims that he then observed a jellied blob that filled the body cavity where the internal organs normally would be, which he described as looking like a huge tumor. According to Mel, the alleged tumor was removed, and the experimenters believed they saw some movement inside it. He claims that when the tumor was cut open, it released a fetal seal with human-looking eyes connected to the tumor with an umbilical cord. Mel explains that the seal seemed to have a hold on those present, and that it and the human experimenters viewed each other for over 2 hours. Mel claims that the seal seemed to him to be a being filled with compassion, and that after nodding at the experimenters, it dove back into the hole. The tumor and sheep remains were allegedly bundled in a tarp and thrown back into the hole. thereby removing any evidence of the experiment. Mel claims that he had been diagnosed with esophageal cancer prior to his experience with the seal, but that afterwards the cancer was entirely gone, with no evidence that it had ever existed. Mel feels that he was healed by the seal-like entity from the sheep carcass. In a later interview, Mel claimed the seal entity was now making regular visits to the Basque shepherds camping around the surface of the Nevada hole. He claimed that the seal was able to communicate with the shepherds through portable radio. However, when recorded, Mel says that the result was only a series of unintelligible sounds, as one might hear an interference on a shortwave transmission. Mel claims that a new species of bird has been spotted in the area of the second hole shortly after his alleged encounter with the seal. The bird was said to be bright red with a bluish beak and an estimated wingspan of 14 inches. He claims that at least 6 individual birds have been seen in the airspace around the hole since the seal incident, but that no professional can name the species from a distance, and said bird has not been captured as of yet. It developed into an urban legend, again the new traveler. Sunbird Mel claims that the so-called sunbird never lands, except near the rim of Mel's hole. He speculates that the bird comes from deep within the hole, and he claims that the locals believe that these birds are the cause of the sheep's death and the tumor that produced the seal entity. Mel professes that he himself has shot at one of the birds in an attempt to bring it down for possible analysis and perhaps dissection, but that after being hit directly twice and tumbling 20 feet, the bird pulled out of the fall and continued flying. According to Mel's story, no birds were seen until 3 days later. Mel reports finding 2 crushed bullets in his yard. He says it is inconclusive if they are the same 2 bullets shot at the bird. Mel claims that a local Basque man volunteered to be lowered into the second hole, but that the man was convinced to reconsider by Mel and the other experimenters. Mel expressed his wish to have his body thrown into the Nevada hole after his death. The description of Mel's second hole in the Nevada desert bears a strong resemblance to the hole or bottomless pit believed in by the Manson family and discussed in the various court proceedings. Manson preached that a bottomless pit with mystical powers existed in the Death Valley area. The Manson pit figured prominently in his end times predictions. The second story, Black-Eyed People. Black-eyed people, sometimes called black-eyed children or Becker young people, often children, with eyes that are solid black with no differentiation between sclera, pupil, or iris, and are occasionally reported to have blue or bluish tinted skin like that of a corpse. Those who report encounters with them often feel that the children were somehow supernatural and extremely dangerous, though they could not explain why. Often they can be seen playing games and singing the nursery songs Old Man Longlegs, where he jumped into a bramble bush. They are usually near a band and are deserted areas. Sometimes the reports talk of them appearing at one's doorstep, usually alone or in a pair. They appear to be unusually confident, yet shy children who avoid your gaze and look down, hiding their eyes, but speaking with an eloquence far beyond their apparent age, often using the mannerisms and speech patterns of an adult. They occasionally even possess the voice of an adult. They will usually attempt to talk the victim into allowing them entry into their home, to use a telephone, or to be safe from some unspecified danger. Occasionally, when seen outside the home, they would immediately stop their play and stare at you, or, if possible, approach you, asking for a place to stay or trying to talk you into giving them a ride home. Often, people begin to agree to their requests against their better judgment, even though the request will seem vaguely unsettling, without realizing why. It is should you discover that their eyes are completely black, that children become very angry and insistent on you complying with their demands. Some people who have encountered BK feel that the children may have been using some form of low-level mind control to get them to comply. Experiences involving the Beck generally do not explain the cause of the children's eye color or the origins of the children themselves. Sometimes thought to be the spirits of lost or murdered children, the Beck are thought to be harbingers of ill will and personal doom. The encounter and in this way are reminiscent of some vampire legends. However, it isn't specified what happens should you comply with their demands, as no reports of the Beck have included that happening, possibly indicating the death of those that comply. The third story, Black-Eyed Kids in Kansas. It was warm for a December afternoon in Hutchinson, and when Katie came home from work in 2008, Katie's ride dropped her off across from her duplex, and as she stood in the street, her ride moving slowly away, she knew something wasn't right. I noticed two boys standing in my driveway. She said one had longer dark hair, and the other had his hood up so I couldn't see him very well. The teenagers, about 15 or 16 years old, seemed to be watching her. Katie felt they were waiting for her. She steeled herself and walked nervously across the road toward her porch. The boys had lurked around her neighborhood for months, but they'd never been so bold as to stand this close to her home. I had seen them before, lingering in the yard, but they always left before I got out of my ride's car. Katie said, I had seen them late at night as well, standing across the street when I would go outside to have an occasional late-night cigarette. But, although pangs of unease told her to run, their boldness angered her. She stopped and asked them why they were on her property. They told me they needed to use a phone and that the neighbors would not let them in. She said that was when I noticed their eyes. They were gold black. Just black, no white, and not even a hint of iris or pupil. Fear shot through her, but as evenly as she could. Katie told them she didn't have a telephone. Katie walked up her porch steps and began to unlock her when the boy in the hood spoke. He asked if they could come in for a glass of water. She said. I turned to look at them again, thinking maybe my mind was playing tricks. But no, when I turned and looked into their eyes, they were pitch black as the first time. These children with dead, black eyes had spoken softly to her, emotion and vocal inflection absent from their words. As she looked at these boys, whose long hair and coat shirts she felt hid more than skin, she knew she had to get away. I felt panicked and fearful, but also very vulnerable and cold. She said it was like I wanted to let them in, but I knew there was evil present. I had felt uneasy before seeing their eyes, but now it all came out. Then one boy said something that turned her fear into complete terror. The hooded one then told me they couldn't come in unless I told them it was okay, and that they hoped I would because they were thirsty. Katie said, I opened my door and darted inside at this point. I shut the door and locked it. She dropped onto the couch, her breaths coming in short, heavy gasps, when something tapped on the window behind her head. One of the boys stood there staring through the glass. Yeah, he said. I remember his words very clearly. Just let us in. Miss, we aren't dangerous. We don't have anything to hurt you with. I was beyond frightened at this point. Katie jumped off the couch and ran through the duplex, checking doors and windows to make sure they were locked. I did wonder if they really couldn't come in unless invited, but I didn't want to find out, she said. I sat in the living room silently waiting for a sign that they had gone. When her boyfriend came home a short time later, the black-eyed teens were still at the house. He asked if I knew who the two boys outside were, and I said no. Katie said he told me they had been standing in the driveway when he pulled up but walked away when he stepped out of the car. He didn't notice the boys' eyes, but they gave him a strange feeling. Katie later asked her neighbors if the black-eyed children had asked to use their telephone like they had claimed. The neighbors noticed the teens standing in Katie's driveway, but never spoke with them. Although it's been more than a year since Katie turned the black-eyed children from her door, she knows they're still around. I still see them every now and then standing across the street, watching, she said, but they have not approached me again.